All right, let's get this show on the road. Welcome. And as always, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join us here for this fourth episode of the Discerning Distributor Show. My name is Alex Chausovsky. I am your host. And today I'm joined by Andrew Hastert of Rockwell Automation. And we're going to be discussing something that I think will be very near and dear to all of your hearts as the distribution community, as decision makers and business leaders, which is the manufacturer-distributor relationship. We'll look at several aspects of this, and I'm really excited for Andrew to share his views on how that relationship has evolved since the beginning of the pandemic and what distributors can really do to differentiate themselves and stand apart relative to their competitors in today's, hyper-competitive marketplace. Before we get started with all of that, I do want to say thank you so much to all of our sponsors. The first sponsor that we have today is Corvist, and I just wanted to share a little bit of information about that company. Corvist empowers companies to delight their customers with B2B portals and e-commerce integrated to SAP ERP. As a cloud-native solution, the Corvist platform allows organizations to transform their customer experience without creating significant burdens for their IT staff. With Corvist managing the entire stack, companies can compete online while retaining the focus on their core business. Corvist solutions process over 2 billion in transactions value every year, interacting directly with clients' SAP systems. SAP has certified Corvist ERP integration for S/4HANA and NetWeaver, and Corvist is SAP's only strategic partner in commerce. Corvist is a global company with clients in the US, UK, EU, Canada, Africa, and Asia. For more information, please reach out to Corvist at 919-424-2120 or visit corvist.com. We're also very fortunate to have a second sponsor in today's episode, and that is Oracle NetSuite. So just a little bit of information about them. For more than 20 years, Oracle NetSuite has helped organizations grow, scale, and adapt to unpredictable change with a unified true cloud platform. Oracle NetSuite enables fast-growing wholesale distribution companies to achieve operational excellence, manage margins and inventory, and support and expand their geographical footprint for years to come. NetSuite also provides an integrated system that includes financials, ERP, HR management software, CRM, professional services automation, and omni-channel commerce. Most notably, though, it's their demand planning and advanced inventory management software. It's used by more than 31,000 customers in 217 countries and dependent territories. So to find more information, visit netsuite.com to join their community and evolve your wholesale distribution business with a scalable cloud platform. Again, I just want to say thank you to both Oracle NetSuite and Corvist for supporting the show. And now I have the esteemed pleasure of introducing our guest, the rock star of today, Andrew Hastert from Rockwell Automation. As Director of Channel Partnerships, Andrew leads the strategy and performance of Rockwell Automation's North American distribution network. Prior to his role, he managed the channel services business, led as-a-service business model transformation, and started the authorized service provider business. He's also held roles in sales and sales management. Andrew's leading the transformation of Rockwell's distributor network to play a meaningful role in delivering new business outcomes, leading customers through their digital transformation journey, and achieving more value across their life cycle. Andrew graduated with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and he currently resides in the Milwaukee area with his wife, Zoe, and 2 daughters, and also 2 mini schnauzers. Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Alex, for having me. And gosh, I wish I would have written a shorter bio for you.
That's okay. I mean, those are great accolades. I love learning about your family and your schnauzers, and just, again, delighted to have you here. I think you're going to have so much value to share with our audience. I can't wait to get in on the conversation. So if you're ready, we'll kick it right off.
Great. I'm excited to be here. I'm a fan of your show, a long fan of DSG and Miller Resource Group. So I'm excited for our chat today.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate it. Let's start kind of looking at the big picture perspective. I think that there's a lot of interest in our audience in hearing your take on what factors do manufacturers consider when determining their go-to-market strategy, and if there are things that change that consideration based on the company's size, the industry in question, or the geographic footprint. Does e-commerce or selling directly to end customers influence that? So I'd love to kick it over to you to answer some of those questions.
Sure. And I'll share my perspective around where we've traditionally been and maybe some insight around where I think we're going, and not just Rockwell Automation, but manufacturers, vendors in general. As a 120-year-old manufacturing company, Rockwell Automation has definitely seen a couple generations worth of change in this regard. We go in the way back machine to the 18th century, and then in the 19th with Industry 1.0 and Industry 2.0, manufacturing centered around places where there's energy sources, there's raw materials, there's human capital, means of transporting goods, and manufacturers' core competency revolved around the domain expertise of the problem they're trying to solve and the manufacturing process of the good that solved the problem. And physical barriers opened between the customer and consumer and the manufacturer. So infilled a gap of distributors, of resellers that understood the customer's problem and forward deployed inventory, as well as complementary products and services to solve that problem and deliver on some sort of outcome. Fast forward today through the 20th century with Industry 3.0 and computers, open means of optimizing the products and the distribution, to now where AI and machine learning and big data and Industry 4.0 is opening new types of value. The channel's still around, right? In fact, in the US alone, wholesale distribution is an over $7 trillion market.
Wow.
And so why is that? I mean, resellers are still wildly relevant to manufacturers. They forward deploy inventory close to the customers. Resellers have domain expertise around the offer, local to the customer, that a manufacturer can't at scale achieve. Resellers and distributors have complementary portfolios, and they focus generally on the industry and customer types. They have a unique understanding of the outcomes the customer is trying to achieve, and they deliver on that. That said, there's massive change afoot, and I'd be happy to double click into where it's going, because I think this is an unprecedented moment. The pandemic's only accelerated that, but there's change afoot right now.
That's terrific insight. And I just want to encourage the audience, as Andrew and I's conversation evolves, please feel free to enter your questions through the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screens. We'll be happy to weave that into the conversation. Andrew, I find that there is this perspective on what really makes a good distribution partner. And I would love to get your take on, can you give some examples perhaps on some success stories and what does an ideal distribution partner for you look like? And perhaps some areas where there's challenges and opportunities for improvement.
Sure. From my perspective, a great distributor partner is one that deeply understands the customer's business drivers, not just the products they buy, not just how they run their operations with those products, but the business outcomes the company's trying to achieve, the competitive advantage the company's trying to achieve in their market, the unique business challenges that the boardroom's discussing. They deeply understand the customer more than the customer understands themselves sometimes. They position offers that deliver on those business outcomes, usually in a consultative and journey-based fashion. You're going to go from zero to hero if you go through this journey with me. They guide the customer through the journey. They track the customer through the journey. They prove the business value quarter after quarter, not just when they got the order. And they're investing in new capabilities to unlock that. They're investing in digital demand gen, digital buying, consultative sales approach. They extend this offer into third-party marketplaces. They're wrapping wider complementary portfolios and offers around the product that a vendor wants to sell. They usually have professional and managed services that wrap around the offer. I'd say, and the partners that do that are not only growing the vendor's offer immediately, they're doing that profitably, and they're able to keep reinvesting in the flywheel. And I would say a lot of these investments and capabilities are a reflection of where customers are going. There's a lot of change afoot, and these are companies that are adapting to the change.
So you said a couple of key terms there that I wanted to highlight, in particular, profitable, right? I mean, the distribution community has long been one that has tight margins. And with the inflationary pressure in the marketplace today, the labor costs increasing, material costs in many cases, higher due to supply chain constraints, longer lead times. How is it that both manufacturers and distributors can partner to make sure that that business remains profitable and that there are funds available to invest in this value creation that you alluded to at the distribution level?
Yes. Well, I think fundamentally, the manufacturer-distributor partnership needs to be truly that. They need to have mutual benefit and mutual interest in mind. And as a manufacturer, I am deeply interested in my distributor partners being profitable and growing profitably. Those profits enable us to have a discussion around reinvesting in new growth engines and new types of value creation. I would Rockwell would not be where it's at without its distributors being profitable in the process of supporting our business. Some examples of how they're doing that, though, we're seeing distributors build out new revenue streams that are often more profitable than the buy resale of products revenue stream, like professional services and managed services. While resale of products, typically a 20-25% margin gain, resale of professional services usually a 30-35% margin gain, managed services 50%. If they develop some bespoke software-based offer, sometimes those margins can be up in the 90%. And to your point, distributors tend to float in the 3 to 6% EBIT range, but we're seeing if they can create new revenue streams that are more profitable and accretive to their existing offer, they can get into much higher EBIT levels, over 10%. Those are some ways, and as a vendor, we're deeply interested in our partners, again, building those new revenue streams and creating profitability.
I think the partnership element that you're describing, one of the things that I know that I've really appreciated year after year is having the chance to attend the Rockwell Automation Fair. It's a great chance for folks to engage with you, whether they are distributor partners, potential end customers. That's coming up pretty soon, right?
That's right. Our automation fair is coming up in mid-November. We'll be based in Chicago this year. That tends to be our biggest automation fair event because it's close to our Milwaukee headquarters. We have a lot of customers in the Midwest. If you haven't been to automation fair, it's an awesome event.
Yes, I would definitely second that. Highly recommended. We did have a question come in from the audience here from Kyle Sinks. Kyle wants to know, how do you evolve your go-to-market strategy as your customer evolves how they prefer to purchase your products, especially as they move away from distribution towards e-commerce?
Kyle, it's a great question. And I'll maybe share my perspective on why e-commerce and changing buying behaviors are happening. And I think it's a complicated why, but one, generational workforce dynamics. Almost half the workforce now is millennial or younger. And as a older millennial, I'll say we grew up with technology. We grew up with phones in our hands, and I learned how to code when I was 10. We're tech natives, we're digital natives. And so that drives a bit of a behavior. There's a generational brain drain happening due to the pandemic, due to the Great Resignation. There's a lot of folks leaving the industry that understand how the products and services distributors sell work. And thus, there's just an inherent change in a buying behavior because there's less domain expertise in the buying process. Gartner had a neat stat that showed by 2025, over 80% of B2B transactions will happen in a digital channel. And when that happens, only 29% of baby boomers will prefer a digital commerce experience, but well over half of the millennials and younger will prefer a digital only buying experience. And you kind of combine that with another stat that's out there that says 2/3 of buying before the time of purchase happens online. And it's all of us have done this. When we think about a new set of golf clubs or a new car or a new set of speakers, we Google best speakers digital, and up comes a bunch of reviews. And we're going to go, all B2B buyers do this. They do tons of online research way before they engage somebody to support the transaction. Not to mention the offer is changing. In 2017 was the year we made the transition from more IP addressable connected devices in the world than there are people. And today there's something like 15 to 20 billion devices that are connected. The nature of the offer is changing. It's more connected. It's creating data. It's using data to make real-time decisions. More and more of these devices are connected. And people are confused often about how to purchase these, how to ingest them into their bigger data practice if they're buying. And I think all that informs this change in buying behavior. People want to use digital to research. They might want to use digital to transact. Digital might be the means by which the value is generated in a software type offer. And more, because of the lack of domain expertise, if it's software and digitally enabled, you might have the vendor hosting the solution in a as a service type of format, software as a service type of format. That's certainly disrupting many B2B applications today, and devices that plug into them. So that's a long way of saying vendors and manufacturers are wildly aware of this and asking themselves, how do we change? How do we change how we support customer research? Why change? Why now? Why with us? Why with our offer? They were, manufacturers are thinking, how do we digitize the configuration and transaction experience? How do we get insight into where the product's sold so that we can go and provide more value after the product's sold? And even drag the customer into an as a service model, since more and more of the offer might be as a service or delivered in an as a service type model. And vendors and manufacturers are absolutely asking if the distributors are accretive to that or blocking the digital interface or the direct interaction with the customer. And I think it's a scary thing for distributors, but I can happily share my perspective as somebody that is leading that strategy, at least with Rockwell in North America, what sort of decisions we're making.
I think that there are a few key elements that I wanted to summarize there. So I heard the younger generation, the ones that could swipe before they wiped, they're definitely buying more online, right? The brain drain that's happening with the older generation exiting the workforce means that trend is only going to accelerate. The digitization of the selling and buying experience is something that's happening that distributors absolutely have to adapt to. There are some tricky considerations there in terms of, what happens to the distributor when there are online marketplaces that manufacturers can present to customers directly. And in fact, we have a question here from DJ Burgess. He wants to know, can you share the typical requirements to qualify as a distributor of your products, such as what are the inventory warehouse or annual sales minimums, technical support, boots on the ground, online initiative, all in the same vein of what we're talking about right now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. And we do, document and enhance the expectations we have for partners on a pretty regular basis. And in the last few years, the expectations have ratcheted up quite a bit. And as you would imagine, based on what we're talking about, the digital investments and the resources to guide a customer through a journey to deliver on outcomes, those are the two biggest areas where investments have been required. And it's interesting, our strategy, and I mentioned, this isn't all bad for distributors. As a manufacturer, we're not thinking distributors go away. Our strategy is actually to enhance the customer experience with and through our partners. We think that is a winning strategy for a long time, or maybe eternity. And here's why. We think that distributors have a complementary portfolio. Distributors have business relationships that at a scale of a manufacturer can't own on their own. Distributors have complementary value add services. Distributors will curate digital experiences that are uniquely tailored to a customer's desired business outcomes that a manufacturer can't own on their own or a vendor can't own on their own. And for all those reasons, we've set up a model where we actually have created digital configuration tools that distributors are embedding as APIs into their e-commerce experience. We've created digital marketing campaigns that we federate and extend through distributors using platforms like Ziff to connect our marketing automation platforms to the distributors. We've set up common data models for the products, for the customers, so that we can set up pricing and transact in an automated fashion through the distributor's e-commerce platform. We've created complementary add-on services and software through portals, and we're constantly working to enhance how that works through APIs. And we're even in the software as a service world, creating token models and currency models that we're selling through distributors that partners can go and consume the SaaS offer, but transacting through the distributor. Because we're finding distributors, even in the more forward-thinking ones, are coming up with complementary offers in the SaaS landscape and coming up with hybrid cloud hosting applications that are complementary to what we do. Partners will forever be relevant to a vendor and a manufacturer as long as they keep adapting the way they provide value and simplifying the customer experience.
Yeah, it certainly does not sound like the distributor of today is a middleman that can be easily removed from the equation, right? They are an integral part of the offering. DJ did come back with a follow-up question. Do you feel there's a redundancy in distribution? Do you see that there's going to be a decline in the number of distributors over the next 5 years or so? Or do you think that it's going to look different?
As a vendor and manufacturer, I think we look at who plays what role in the customer experience is a model we need to be adaptive around. And we are thinking about it in the context of an end-to-end customer journey. And end-to-end, it suggests it's linear. It's actually circuitous. We don't have a customer start and end their relationship with us. Rather, we start on a journey with them, we create value, and we hopefully continue enhancing the value we create over and over again. But we're doing that with our partners. We actually set up a customer experience organization. We've come up with a standard framework for process, and we have our partners lining up with us shoulder to shoulder, asking what role they play, what role we play. We're always asking how we enhance the value across that landscape. And that means we're optimizing who plays what role across the customer landscape. But I would offer, some of those roles, if one person's doing this, another person's doing that, to do this often requires investment. And lately it's been digital investment. It's setting up new cloud infrastructure, new data models, new data lakes, new applications, plugging those applications in, plugging them in directly to the customer, setting up new API integrations. And I think more and more distributors are becoming more like almost software companies on their own to manage the customer to distributor to vendor integration and multi-direction, multi-vendor, multi-customer. So as such, there does appear to be a market-led consolidation happening where with the scale of investments that are required, the scale of the company is important to be able to make those investments. I would add, though, through the pandemic, we've seen an acceleration of some of these factors. And I could maybe share some insight into what we're seeing in that regard. An acceleration of some of these factors, but also an expansion of the value partners play.
Yeah, I think it's a great transition to my next general question for you is how have the things that we've been discussing so far and the general manufacturer-distributor relationship evolved since the start of the pandemic? I know there's been a lot of different things that have happened. Talk to us about the ones that you see as the most impactful.
Yeah, there's a quote, and I don't know who's it's attributed to anymore, that, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth, right? And I think the pandemic was just that for
I think it's Mike Tyson, if I remember correctly.
I think that's right. And nobody wants to get punched by that guy. But
yeah,
I think the pandemic was that for anyone in the product distribution space. And you might say any industry, every industry was probably touched somehow. But obviously, there was this trend towards disruption of supply chain and disruption of human capital and digitization of experiences that was going way before the pandemic. And it's like we took the trend line, the paper, ripped it, and fast forwarded it 10 years and taped it back together and said, now what? That's what happened in March of 2020. There's an unprecedented human capital disruption with millions leaving the workforce. With the Great Resignation, millions of people changing roles. There was this disruption in the buying influence. Once upon a time, you would sell something to one buyer or maybe two buyers. There's a trend towards 10 plus buyers in complex transactions, large capital spend. And those geographic locations for those buyers are not local, right? It's not like one distributor in one market can go touch 10 buyers. These folks are an IT consultant, a digital transformation consultant, a plant manager, a headquarters location. Those are 10 buyers in 10 locations. Of course, inflation is having an impact. The Fed printed trillions of dollars, and you see constraints across supply chain in the market. Prices went up, costs went up, and that seems to be continuing even today. And some distributors, end up coming out in an inflationary period okay. They can realize price realization, but it still creates disruption in their own input costs. There's supply chain challenges. I don't have to talk about the chip supply challenges as well as everything downstream from that. And that seems to be ongoing too with plant shutdowns, especially in China. And then there's this shift to as a service. Companies are finding they don't have the domain expertise or the know-how in-house to set up systems, to plug products into systems, to manage them, to manage the data model, to manage the software application. Companies are setting that up direct, their own software as a service or infrastructure as a service business model. So I'd say the pandemic kicked all of that into a totally different gear and forced companies to react at a totally different pace. And we've been delighted to find, Rockwell and its partner network has weathered the storm nicely because our partners had forward deployed inventory. They had domain experts that deeply understood our customers and could navigate the what they buy and why really well, and had domain expertise that our customers more than ever needed. I'm sure we're not alone in that. I think a lot of industries found that the distributor became more critical during the pandemic than less.
So in that vein, we actually have another question from Kyle here. With an assigned distributor territory, geographic assignment is what he's referring to. How do you serve the customers that are not being influenced or sold to by the distributor? How do you do that, particularly without creating an adversarial relationship with your distributors? I think that's always been a tricky thing for manufacturers to manage, right? Because you do have some direct opportunities. You don't want to step on anybody's toes. How does that work in today's environment?
It's a good question, Kyle. And I would offer Rockwell Automation, almost 100% of our transactions in markets like the US and Canada, where we have pretty high share, almost 100% of them are through distributor partners. And I mentioned the one buyer now becoming 10, and they're geographically displaced. As you would imagine, that's created some confusion at times around who's transacting. We end up optimizing for what the customer needs and wants. And customer as complicated in that the customer might be a buyer, an influencer, a user, a consumer, a consultant. And we spend more time with customers now, deeply understanding where they're going to consume the value and where they're going to purchase than we have in the past. We've gotten to know our customers better during this period of time, as well as our partners and who's adding what value across that landscape. We have never, I'd say, where our partners influenced a project or an order or a contract and added a lot of value and demand gen, as well as the support of the ongoing contract. A lot of our distributors have stood up customer success organizations to support recurring revenue models. It's hard to turn them down when it comes to some sort of incentive fee or the resale dollars. We have, though, had to set up a commission rep model to complement our buy resale model so that we can share credit amongst partners based on their role in delivery and influence. And I think every vendor is looking at something similar. We ultimately want to incentivize partners to add a lot of value across the customer lifecycle, and we're enhancing our processes to do that.
Well, I think that the onus is obviously on adaptation and on change. You talk about having to, really dive deep into your own compensation structure in order to reflect the changes that are going on. And you've alluded a couple of times to kind of go-to-market strategies that manufacturers and distributors can go with together, right? As a joint effort. I think that certainly helps alleviate any kind of, competition, if you will, if you go to market with one strategy. So can you perhaps think of an example or two that you can give us about something that's been effective within your recent experience where, of course, without divulging any names, but what were you able to deliver to the marketplace as a joint strategy with one of your distributor partners?
Yeah, so maybe before the pandemic, let's say 5 years ago, there was this mantra, at least in our industry, that distributors sold boxes, and when it came time to sell the professional service around implementing that box or managing the box and managing the experience around it, that was either reserved for the manufacturer entirely or a totally different partner type, like a system integrator or OEM. And distributors, those lines didn't cross. That was the mantra. That was just the MO of the industry. And I would say we started to figure out that was a very limiting approach in that, again, distributors understand customers better than manufacturers do. And distributors are closer to the customer physically, and often with relationships closer. So we set up what we call an authorized service provider model, in which we came up with a standard delivery model for certain services, like startup services of our products, or consulting services around our products, or managed services around our products. And we deputized our partners to be able to go and sell and deliver these services close to the customer, with their people, with their staff. If they set up their own professional services business model. And while Rockwell's benefit is, of course, selling more products, we also were able to set it up such that we guided the customers through a journey into a managed service model, where the product would be on some sort of contract. Or maybe we even shifted the product into an as a service model, like software moving into an as a service model now. And we've had an incredible uptake of distributors delivering these services in a billable fashion, driving adoption of our offer, and driving a dramatic growth of our recurring revenue business as a result. And it's created a new profitable revenue stream for the distributor. It's created more value for the customer. They're adopting our offers at totally new levels. And of course, it's creating value for us as we're getting wider adoption of our portfolio. So that's an example where we've had to kind of balance that. And we, again, have these people forward deployed close to the customer. So the person closest to the consumer of the value ends up being compensated for it.
Wow, that's an amazing example of the way that it should be done, right? Because again, everything is driven by delivering that customer value. And it sounds like in this particular case, it's a mutually beneficial arrangement that obviously helps everybody kind of drive business to various customers.
That's right. And Alex, if I could, I think to the question somebody asked earlier on how we balance the incentives.
Yeah.
There are times, though, where we bring that customer on that journey, we land a contract, and that contract's for 100 plants around the globe. What do you do? So the way we've been tackling it is when we get into that sort of enterprise deployment, we today are taking those contracts direct, and we've set up a rep fee model where we're paying partners a commensurate fee associated with the commercial and customer success role they play with the customer. And we'll pay some sort of fee for influencing the sale, and some sort of fee for doing ongoing support and management with the customer. That might evolve. We might find more complicated ways, or maybe more modern ways to incentivize in a buy resale type of format. But we found direct with the fee is appropriate for those sorts of engagements. What shocked us, though, is we spent a lot of time with software as a service companies asking them, how do you do it? Because they're in the same boat. They have value-added resellers working with customers and across an enterprise. And it's shocking. A lot of the born in the cloud software and the software as a service companies started direct selling, direct delivery, direct management, no partners involved whatsoever. And almost all of those guys are suddenly coming to consulting firms. I'm on the board of a group called Technology Services Industry Association, or TSIA. There's a bunch of cloud SaaS companies in the group. And they're an outstanding resource for distributors, by the way, TSIA. Tons of SaaS companies are suddenly coming to TSIA asking, how do I set up a channel model? How do I set up a distributor model? I need people to add a complementary portfolio local to the customer, create new types of value, scale. I need to scale my delivery model. So even in the SaaS space, they need partners, and they need partners to be part of buy resale.
Wow, that's really incredible. So as the relationship has essentially grown tighter because of the need to serve the customer and drive value, and in light of your earlier comments about the labor market tightness and challenges finding the right people, have you seen any intra-partner competition for labor, engineering talent, IT talent between manufacturers and distributors? And how do you manage that? How do you prevent pilfering of top performers from one to the other, right?
Yeah, yes and no. I think, of course, talented people end up being sought after, right? And sought after by vendors like us and partners of ours, and across our competitors as well. I think that's an ever-present challenge. It's probably increased. I think we worry about the root cause of that problem, not the noise of that problem. The root cause is talent that understands customer business objectives, the technology they implement to achieve new outcomes, the journey they go through to get there. We focus a lot on generating a new generation of talent that can go enter the market and add value for us, our partners, our customers, and sometimes maybe even our competitors. We worry more about talent generation, human capital generation, than the noise around who's working where. I would offer, we've set up not only a training organization, we've set up a organization that works closely with universities and tech schools to create certified resources on our platforms, on the tech in our space. We've also set up an Academy of Advanced Manufacturing. We take veterans because there's a lot of folks that are in the armed services that leave and end up getting into lesser jobs. Despite a ton of hard skills and soft skills they've developed in the military, they end up getting kind of misplaced into lower career bands just because they have a gap on the resume, so to speak. So we're bringing a lot of those folks into this Academy of Advanced Manufacturing, run them through a crash course on our platforms and technology. And then we have customers actually paying us to bring them into their business, and as engineers, as technicians, as business managers, and we're having huge success in bringing talent into the marketplace. I'd say there's a human capital talent issue that we're trying to solve. There's also a cultural challenge we're trying to solve in that, at least in the manufacturing space in the US, it's traditionally very white male dominant. And that might limit, the talent pool you pull in and can keep. It's kind of easy to get white guys in a place where there's a bunch of white guys, but if you want to broaden the talent pool, you have to intentionally develop it to be inclusive, to be exciting for people that aren't just white guys. That end, even if you have the talent and you're able to keep them, engagement is so critical. How much you bring to work every day. People want to be able to bring their full selves to work every day, and that requires them feeling safe and accepted and welcomed. And we have done a lot to try to, in our four walls, make our environment more inclusive and engaging for all people, so all people can bring their best selves to work. We've been recognized for some of our progress. We were recognized by Catalyst for advancing women in the workplace and leadership roles, but we're not done. We're on a long journey. We call it our culture of inclusion journey, to be a more inclusive and engaging place for all people. And we think that's going to have benefits for the broader industry. We also have our distributor partners, by the way, join some of our learning labs and sessions where we try to develop new skills, especially amongst leaders, to be more inclusive and engaging.
Yeah, I think that this element cannot be stressed enough, particularly to the smaller and mid-sized distributors. I find that the DEI discussion oftentimes is almost reserved for the big publicly traded companies that they're actually putting resources behind it, whereas in practice, everyone else is doing a little bit of marketing speak around it, but then really nothing on the ground. So if people are looking for ways for distributors to distinguish themselves, right, especially in light of the fact that the younger generations, the younger Gen Xers, the millennials, certainly the Gen Z generation, they care so much more about the DEI issues in the workplace that companies have to adapt to that. It's no longer optional. It's not a wish list item. You've got to be investing resources into doing something like that right now. So I think that that's an incredible journey that Rockwell is on, and I'm certainly very glad to hear that. I have a couple of questions here that came in from the audience that I wanted to address. So DJ asked, online commerce added a new dropship model from manufacturer to end user versus traditional shipping to the distributor and then shipping from distributor to the end user. Is Rockwell drop shipping for their distributors?
Yeah, we've long drop shipped, not by default, but by necessity when a customer needed it. Whether it was bought online or bought through a distributor. Because we've been doing it for a long time, it didn't force us out of a distributor model. It was just integral to our distributor model. We ended up, we charge for it, so it's something the customer pays for. I would offer, especially the supply chain crisis of the last few years, what it's accelerated is not necessarily drop ships. Although that happens, what is accelerated is pre-buying. Somebody buying way ahead of when they need the materials, because the lead time is either perceivably or actually a lot longer, right? And it could be 5 times, 10 times longer than what it used to be. And we're having customers come to us saying, listen, we're building new plants in 26, 27, 28, and we need to We've done our capital planning. We're going to place an order for the materials we need for plants 5 years from now, which is
Wow.
shocking. We've never seen that before. We've
Yeah.
seen a 1 or 2 or 3 year pre-buy for big capital equipment, but to have it 5+ years out is just unprecedented for us, at least. And I'm sure every industry is facing something similar. And what's also interesting is they often don't know where those materials are going, especially if it's a large e-commerce company with many distribution centers, or a large food company with forward deployed manufacturing. They might not know exactly where that's going. So they do more and more come to the manufacturer direct asking, what do I do? And we are setting up, creative models where they work with, as best we can, the right distributors for what we think will be the long-term play for them, or setting up like a direct procurement model that ends up, getting resold through the distributors local to the plants. We are at all costs making sure that we keep the distributor close with the customer, because frankly, what a manufacturer does well is create offers that create value for a customer. What we don't do well is manage material flow, manage bundling of materials, staging materials, kitting, the last mile value add. And those are things that we do our best to avoid trying to get in the middle of. We end up disappointing customers when we try to own that. We do our best to keep distributors in the middle of it, but it's certainly a challenge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great response. The next question comes from Eli Jenkins. Andrew, have you observed that the Rockwell Automation Distributions companies are good candidates for selling software versus a traditional software value-added reseller? Are they adapting well from selling core component focus to software add-ons also?
Hey, Eli, it's a good question. And for what it's worth, I don't want to talk too much about just our channel, and I would like to generalize a little bit, but I'll maybe share as much insight as I can. If there's a distributor company that's long been good at understanding customers' business drivers, and they have a portfolio that adds value, and they're able to wrap complementary offers and complementary services around that offer, it's usually a natural enhancement when you say, what about this additional thing that plugs into the core offer? That's just a natural enhancement, right? That said, as we get into software as a service, especially software as a service, there's so much additional complementary capability required to sell the offer. There's usually complementary capabilities required to consume the value, because software as a service is by nature hosted in a public or private cloud, or maybe kind of hybrid deployed, but with it needs IT infrastructure, compute infrastructure, services to integrate all this stuff, services to adopt the offer. And there's also a different velocity by which people buy it, right? They might try it for free by going on Google, finding the offer, and that day trying it for free. They might want to quickly integrate it with another application. They might want to quickly integrate it with some other native technology in their facility. And some of those capabilities, some of that velocity, the cultural velocity around how to sell and how to deliver service, some of that's not native to distributors. And they have to either build out a lot of new capability or build out a different division. Or we're seeing a couple of examples, and I'll share a publicly traded example. Sonepar bought the company Factory Systems. Sonepar's a large global electrical distributor. What would an electrical distributor be doing buying a software reseller, a SaaS software reseller, as a totally separate acquisition, and then integrating it? I think you're seeing some distributors see they need to buy that sort of capability if they're going to be relevant in the space, because it's so different from a velocity, a portfolio, commercial engagement model standpoint.
Yeah, that's a very, very true. I mean, a great example in someone bringing in expertise that they don't already have in order to supplement and effectively go to the market for their manufacturer partners. So terrific example. One more here from Lou Calabresi. In your opinion, what are the pros and cons of a distribution network? That's a pretty generic question. I think we've touched on some of the elements of it already, but if you were to answer it in a kind of holistic way, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, there's pros and cons from a manufacturer vendor standpoint and pros and cons from a customer standpoint. And I'll maybe try to answer both at the same time. I think distributors have usually inventory, like product inventory and complementary services and software um, local to a customer. And especially during a supply chain crisis, that's relevant. That's relevant from a CapEx project deployment. That's relevant from a MRO break fix model standpoint. That's relevant for a manufacturer in that the inventory is off their books usually. During cash flow challenges, having forward deployed inventory is very good for manufacturers and for customers. Distributors tend to have deep relationships, personal and business relationships with customers that at scale manufacturers can't develop. During the Great Resignation, manufacturers can't sustain on their own. And that's relevant for customers, as with that relationship comes an intimacy that guides a buying experience that provides value and outcomes for the manufacturer, hopefully in perpetuity. They keep enhancing the value and creating more and more value. And I think distributors tend to be more adaptive around customer needs than a vendor or manufacturer, especially as it relates to the last mile of selling and delivery and support. Distributors are building out outstanding e-commerce type of capabilities and digital support sort of capabilities and doing business to business system integrations. Most of our distributors have built e-commerce and digital support models that are way ahead of Rockwell's. And some of that's by design and some of that's happenstance because the distributors are closer to the customer and more adapted to their needs. So those are a bunch of pros for the customer and for the manufacturer. You know, the negative, of course, is with a traditional model, especially if distributors aren't making those investments, it's very difficult to excite buyers that are buying and doing digital research ahead of a buying experience, maybe doing a digital buy, although we're finding digital procurement is not as exciting as everyone thinks it is. Unless you're talking about EDI or punch out, most customers don't want to buy actually online when it comes to a B2B setting. You know, Amazon business hasn't taken off really in a lot of these spaces for that reason. And I'd say, so if you're not doing digital demand gen, if you're not enabling digital buying and enabling digital support and then adding value in the buying process and then in the service delivery and managed service sort of space, it's very difficult for manufacturers to know where they sold what they sold. It's very difficult for them to prove the value, to enable the shift to an as a service model, and frankly, sustain their share in the market. So those are some cons, especially if distributors aren't adapting.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic perspectives. Obviously, you're the head of channels, so there's going to be a lot of pros, but the cons are very real, and you have to consider those, right, as you make that determination. One question came in from Luis Hernandez. He is a representative representing a manufacturing, a USA company in Mexico. He wants to know, what are your impressions with the Latin America distributors' industrial channels? We know that are different markets for different economies, and he'd like to know, in your perspective, what will the common denominator be between, I guess, regional approaches to distribution in the US and in the broader Americas region?
Well, it's a good question. Luis, I apologize. I don't spend much time in Latin America. So I can only share a perspective, and perspective I maybe hear through others. I have spent time with some Latin American distributors of ours. And from my perspective, I think, and this might be a nature of our business, or might be a nature of the industry as a whole, we tend to have a very mature engagement with customers in the US and in Canada. You know, we tend to have a high market share in those places and a maybe more mature distribution model. What I've found is the further we get away, as we get into like Latin America or Asia or parts of Europe, the more dynamic the market is, the more entrepreneurial the distributors are, the more adaptive and agile they are. And frankly, it's inspiring for an American to see that. just to see how agile and adaptive companies in Mexico and the rest of Latin America are. Um, I think we value having distributor partners local to customers because of the intimacy, because of the inventory management, the value add, the understanding of the business drivers. But when you cross the border into Mexico and the rest of Latin America, suddenly you have people speaking Spanish and in some cases Portuguese. Like there's language dynamics, there's currency, there's tax, there's all sorts of unique challenges that some of these countries impose on a manufacturer. Distributors become even more important to help navigate some of these challenges. I think the common denominator, though, globally, is customers are changing, and that's not going to stop. Their buying behaviors are changing. What they value is changing. How they value receiving engagement from vendors and partners, and the more adaptive companies can be, the better during this time of change. And I think, how do you do that? Understanding your customers' unique business challenges and objectives better than they do, bringing in partners and consultants and people, talent that's constantly causing you to self-disrupt how you deliver value. I think scale helps because some of these changes require investments in digital and talent and new revenue streams. Leaning into these new areas of learning, they might be scary, but leaning into them and learning from them and figuring out if and how you can make money profitably in them, I think that's really important too. But that's my thought on common denominators. It's consistently providing new types of value.
Yeah, and I think with the dollar being as strong as it is, particularly outside of the US market, right, you need those established relationships to potentially pitch your products versus somebody else who might be coming from Europe, where there's not the currency fluctuation that they have in terms of affecting the price of the product. So certainly a key element there. We're nearing the top of the hour here. I did have one last question, and if you could just spend a few minutes talking about this. There's been kind of like this idea of the boogeyman, right? The manufacturer's evolution as a disruptive force for distributors. Will there be an elimination of distribution? Will there be a critical need for the value enhancement that it provides? And that is part of the natural progression of how we work. So we've got technologies like Web3 and crypto coming into play and really disrupting, and in certain industries, really eliminating the kind of distribution channel or the middleman in those particular sectors. I think about money transfer. I think about insurance industry, mortgage industry, potentially facing significant disruption. So the question that I'd love to hear from you a response to is, how can distributors help manufacturers simplify and ultimately achieve outcomes? And we'll wrap it up with that.
Good. Well, I mentioned earlier in the B2B space, one of the more extreme ends of the spectrum of disruptive business models and direct engagement models is the software as a service space, the SaaS space. These folks were born in the cloud. They made $1 to 10 or 100 million in a direct selling, direct delivery, direct support model. They view channel partners sometimes as a noise, as unnecessary cost, as in the way of adaptation, right? And I take heart in the fact that, at TSIA, they're having SaaS companies, born in the cloud SaaS companies, join just to get advice on how to build out channel models, just how to build out ecosystems, how to build out marketplaces that include third parties. Resellers, distributors will always be relevant. And I think, especially if you can adapt, if you can evolve, based on customer business outcome needs, based on the portfolio they're expecting, knowing it's moving more and more into services to consult and take a customer on a journey in a managed service model. And especially, with that services portfolio, being able to prove value with the customer success engine, on not just when they got the order, but quarter after quarter. I think those are critical adaptations distributors are investing in right now. But I think distributors that adapt will always be relevant.
And that is a great message to wrap things up on. Andrew, I really enjoyed our conversation. You provided some great insights into how your organization deals with the distribution channel, what distribution companies need to really focus on as they look to the future. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an enlightening conversation.
Thanks again for having me, Alex.
Absolutely. I will love to have you back on a future episode if you're willing to come back.
I'll be back.
Okay, very good. So with that, we're going to wrap things up here. I just wanted to share a few pieces of information with you. We've got a couple of other webinars and webcasts coming from the Distribution Strategy Group. The Wholesale Chain Show with Ian Heller is on October 12th. Here you can see the next edition of the episode of Marketplace Strategy for Distributors with Jonathan Bain on October 19th. And below, you can see the contact details, both for myself here at Miller Resource and Andrew over at Rockwell Automation. If you have any follow-up questions or you want to reach out to us, we'll happily engage with you and continue the conversation online. So with that, I just wanted to say again, thanks for everyone for joining us today. It's been an awesome episode. Andrew, you rock, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you so much for being here today. Have a great one. Take care.